Hello and welcome to Books Up Close, the podcast. I'm Chris Lloyd, a writer and academic, and on this show I talk to other writers about their work and their practice. We also collaborate on a close reading of their writing, looking at a particular passage or a whole poem, and talk about its meanings, resonances, and the technicalities of language. This is a show for book nerds, aspiring and established authors, or anyone interested in how texts get made. In this episode, I talked to Tawseef Khan about his novel Determination. We look at a passage from page 55 of the hardback, but if you don't have that, you can go to the Substack and find that extract there and read along with us. Apologies for the audio on this episode. It's not the best, but I hope you will stick with us. Tawseef is an immigration solicitor and writer based in Manchester. His fiction has appeared in the Lighthouse and Test Signal, a northern anthology. His debut non-fiction book, Muslim Actually, was published by Atlantic in 2021, and his novel Determination was published in 2024. Well, welcome, Tawseef. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So the opening question I'm asking everyone is what are your thoughts, feelings about close reading as a practice, as an endeavor, and also how does it feel to be close reading your own work?
Well, I think close reading is really important, right? Especially in the editorial process. You want to figure out how to get closer to your intentions as a writer and how to achieve the effect that you want to get with a piece of writing, with a particular section of a story or a paragraph or two. I think that there is no such thing as a throwaway line or a throwaway sentence in a story. If it doesn't serve you, if it doesn't serve the story or the character in some way, then it's a missed opportunity. So I think that definitely when I'm close reading or when I'm editing, I'm really trying to pay attention to the effect that each sentence is having, not only for rhythm, because I think that for me, rhythm and the key of a piece of work is the point of entry. And it's the thing that I probably stress out about the most. But I think that, once you get into that, then I'm looking at, what is the effect of it? What am I trying to achieve? Is it successful? And I think that, I enjoy close reading my own work. I think being close read in any way, even if it's by yourself, is a really lovely thing. So I enjoy talking about my work because I put so much work in it. I put so much effort into it. And also it's just really validating to see and to hear how other people interpret it. And I think that's the other thing about close reading, is that so much of how we write, so much of the writing process is informed by other people's close reading of your work. So I'm sure you're familiar with the Sheila Heti essay, which I really believe in. So much of writing is done with, in conjunction with other people, in conjunction with your reading friends, your second readers, and they are the ones who identify the themes or the ideas or the images that you're playing with that might repeat throughout a piece of work that you might not have noticed yourself because you're so into the granular part of it. And even in the process of this book being out, I think some of the most privileged moments of it have been where somebody has done a close reading of it. So there was somebody who came to an event I did in Durham with Andrew Macmillan, and they afterwards wrote up a whole blog about our two novels and paid a lot of attention to it, compared it to Jane Austen's Persuasion, which was really, really cool. And I loved reading that purely because it just made me feel really good and really clever. So close reading is good. It's fun.
I want to ask you about how you started writing or think about writing alongside your other career, which is huge, right?
Yeah, it's all right. It's big. It takes up a lot of time. Well, I've always wanted to write. So even when I wasn't writing, I knew that there was going to be a moment where it happened. It was just something that was delayed. And I felt two things. One, that I didn't have the time and opportunity because I was trying to become a lawyer, and that was sort of the sum focus of my life at the time. But I think the other aspect of it was that I wanted to have something to say. And I believed at the time, don't necessarily believe it as much now, that I needed a certain amount of life experience in order to write something that felt suitably momentous and important, right? Because at the time I felt that books, if they were going to be written, if I was going to write them, needed to be important. So I was always going to. It was just a case of when the window of opportunity came. And in a way, I've been writing since I was a child. So I always tell the story of when I was like 10 or 11, I would watch episodes of the Power Rangers or whatever was on at the time, and I would like write story treatments of them. And obviously, I didn't know what I was doing, but they are the first short stories I wrote. I guess there is this desire to put things down to paper and to see how they read and feel. And that was something that I was doing unconsciously. And then when I had the idea for determination when I was 23, but I didn't start writing it until I was 29 when I finished my PhD. And I think in a way, the PhD is also like a big part of my writing trajectory. Right? My friend always says like the PhD is your first book. And so because I haven't gone into academia, it's not an actual first book. It's just, something that I have in my cupboard somewhere. But it still taught me how to start a process and see it through in terms of putting things on a page, working with them, and getting them to a point where you feel like, well, I can let go of this now. So I would say that was my writing trajectory.
Yeah, a PhD is an enormous piece of writing work. So, like, yeah, anyone that does a PhD, you are a writer because you have to write a lot of words and construct a whole
Completely.
beginning to end, right? And this book does follow a lawyer, and we're kind of in that world. But the passage we're going to look at today is kind of maybe a little bit different. We're kind of focalized in a particular character here. Is there anything you want to tell us before you start reading this passage? Is there anything we need to know, say, if someone hasn't read the book?
I think it speaks for itself, but I think that maybe framing it in a way, I should maybe frame the book. And so the novel is a novel, but there are these moments where we pan out into other people's lives. So not the life of the solicitor Jamila, but into her clients' lives, into her staff members' lives, and we get what essentially was written as a short story based around them. And so this is the first one that we get in the book. It's about a woman called Nazish, who is a queer asylum seeker from Pakistan, and she's come to the firm for help with an appeal. And I think the section that we're about to go over and think about is it's like a hinge in the story or a turning point in the story, I would say. And it's towards us understanding a bit more about this person's life or experience and the context in which the story is taking place. We're encountering someone who is quite difficult and is quite like a reluctant narrator of their own story. And so this gives us an understanding of why. And I think it also opens them up a little bit. So we get to understand the character's vulnerabilities a little bit more. So yeah, I would say that that's the framing of what we're going to read.
Thank you so much. Yeah, if you want to read it, it'd be fantastic.
In the detention center, it wasn't freedom of movement that Nazish had missed, but air, breezes, sunlight flickering along her skin, the powdery scent of violets in the park. When the enforcement officers grabbed her, she felt like she had stopped breathing. When they drove her to London, she held her breath the entire way. Some of the other women in the van wailed to themselves. Some were trapped in an intoxicated stupor. Some bartered with their gods. Nazish closed her eyes and waited for it to end. People entered the continent like this, hiding in lorries, squeezing themselves behind wheels. She had considered herself better, superior, for arriving through legal channels. But once captured, she understood that she was the same. The detention center had a dining room, day room, gym, library, and laundry. The bedrooms were freshly painted, brightly lit, decorated with cheerful curtains and beach furniture. An idea of airiness, but ultimately synthetic. Nazish still didn't breathe, not for the 3 weeks that she was inside, sharing a room with a Congolese woman who had threatened to knife her by day and who had screamed for her mother at night. The indignities of that time wouldn't leave Nazish for as long as she lived. She had plugged her period blood with tissue paper, eaten potatoes and chicken nuggets and other processed stodge that left her unable to use the bathroom. Shivered in the cold with nothing to shield her but her grandmother's shawl and the clothes on her back. And not until she sat on the train that returned her to Manchester, not until she made an appointment to see Shah and co-solicitors, has she dared to hold air in her lungs again.
Thank you so much. I think it's important to get like that whole section. I know it's a little bit longer, but I feel you get the entire movement of her thought in this part. Yeah, so I'm like, I had a few selections from the novel that I sent you, and they were each standing out to me in different ways for different kinds of themes that I thought the book was kind of staging. And this one, what I was really interested in when you first do that focalization thing, like when we jump to another character, I was like, ooh, what's happening? Where are we going? Right? Because we're so used to being in that, even though it's all third person, right? Like it's still heavily focalized through that one character. We're following her and her trajectory. And suddenly we move focus. And I think there's something thematic happening there in the book, right? That like she is not an isolated unit as she is taught to be by her father, right? The one that holds everything up, the one that has all the information, but actually her life is way more porous than even she knows it to be, right? That other people are constantly kind of coming in, and that's part of her job as a solicitor. And I think so those kind of scene shifts almost are really interesting. I'm wondering, first of all, is there a reason why you didn't move them to first person? Is there something about the third person focalize? Like I've got thoughts, but why the focalized third person, not first person for these?
Mm. Well, I think the first thing is about reader experience, right? So I think one of the events I did for the book, the person interviewing me described them as these interventions as like a series of shocks that take place in the novel that force us to reckon with somebody else's perspective or the scale of what we're dealing with when we talk about the asylum system or the immigration system. And so thinking about the shocks and the impacts on a reader, I wanted those to feel as seamless as possible, as easy as possible for a reader to take. And I felt that shifting from first person to third and then back was maybe one too many shifts in the process of the book. So I think that that was maybe one of the big parts. And I felt that it was also just easier for us to connect with the character and what was going on, their interiority, and also the. I think so much of the book is about what we reveal and what we choose to hold back, and it's about the power dynamics and the question of autonomy within the system. How do you have a sense of self whilst being subjected to the system? And so I felt that like be having the stories in the third person was the best way to navigate the tensions between the two, because I think that there will be so much more that a person would withhold in the first person that we might not get access to. So it enables me to play with, yeah, questions of access and how much is revealed, I would say.
Yeah, and kind of proximity. Because I think this whole passage is really interesting rhetorically. You do a couple of things with like repetition and like almost listing that I find quite interesting. And then this real grounding in the body and the breath and the physicality. Because we start with like in the detention center, it wasn't freedom of movement, but air dash. We're really getting into grammar on this podcast, by the way. That dash, which almost kind of opens that out, right? Like we literally get the air, and then we get dash, breezes, sunlight flickering across the skin, the powdery scent of violets in the park, and I can't help but hear sibilance throughout that line: the breezes, the sunlight, the skin, the scent, the violets. Right? It's such a soft line before when the enforcement officers grabbed her, like a real contrast between like the moment of freedom and the moment of like detainment or containment. And then when they drove her to London, she held her breath. So we've got when the enforcement, when they drove her. So like already there's some repetition. I'm wondering whether that was very conscious or whether that just came in the voice.
I think that when I was writing this, I knew the feeling that it would take. And then obviously in the editing, you become aware of what you're doing and you try to turn up the ante a little bit. So then the repetition becomes very deliberate. You realize that there is a tension between the kind of the loss of autonomy versus freedom of movement, and so on. And then these two paragraphs become a way to again exploit those tensions as much as possible to turn the dial upon those in as many ways as you can. So then I think that that's what I started to do. I started to think about, okay, how many ways can I kind of really think about the way in which air and breath and freedom or the illusion of freedom can operate in this space. Like detention centers are very, very big. They look very modern. There is a sense of freedom and luxury and privilege within them, but you're still confined. And also, what effect does that have on you when it's something to do with something as like natural and as simple as breath? So there became this sort of rhetorical advice of this rhetorical technique of what does it mean for somebody to hold their breath for 3 weeks? We know that that's not feasible, but there is something within that. What does it mean for a person to do that? I think it forces us to reckon with it.
Yeah, and I think because we have the when the very next sentence we have some of the other women, some were trapped, some bartered. Right, again we get like this as though the repetition at once is like a reinforcing kind of feeling, right? Like this, the repetition keeps adding more, but it also suggests a kind of endlessness of people in this cycle somehow, that the repetition is like the repetition of the individuals too. Like there's gonna be another, there's gonna be another, there's gonna be another, brought into this world that I found, like at a linguistic level it's quite nice because you get the repetition, but at the same time it feels kind of claustrophobic as a repetition.
Yeah, yeah, that was definitely the intention. And when I was reading it back, that's what I was thinking, that I wanted it to sound as claustrophobic and as oppressive as possible by listing these things, by sort of like stacking them on top of each other. I'm forcing us to reckon with the weight of this, the weight of not just one person, but the weight of all of these women, the weight of all the ways in which they deal with this moment, right? The various ways, and the ways in which we can all feel different, special in some way, and yet the system has a way of stripping us of our identities, of our markers of difference, our privileges, and equalize us as just these bodies, liable to be confined and detained and done with whatever way the system chooses to. That was a very deliberate choice to go there as well.
Yeah, you definitely feel that. There's some of the other women, some bartered with their gods. People entered the continent like this. There is an abstraction of like, this is happening to some people who aren't me, but those experiences are reflecting on Nazish particularly as well, right? They're all caught in the same mechanism, even amidst their, like people entered the continent like this, squeezing themselves behind wheels. She had considered herself better, superior, but once captured, she understood that she was the same, like as you were saying,
Mm,
but at a
mm.
linguistic level, that line, people entered the continent like this, hiding in lorries, squeezing themselves, like that's her voice, right? That's like what you'd call free and direct discourse, right? It's not attributed to her, but that's her thought. It's her internal language.
Yeah, and so it's playing with in a way that the book does all the way through. Again, the tension between the individual and the collective, the mass, the group of people. So even Nazish is understanding that the things that she thinks made her special don't, right? And that is a horrifying thing, that she associates those who come on, on lorries trapped, behind wheels as different to her, right? She is a privileged, educated, middle class woman. She thinks the system will be easy on her, but it isn't. It strips them all of their humanity, and they're all the same. So she's constantly having to reckon with her place within this, the idea that she is not special within it. The system strips us of all the things that make us feel special or important. And that's what, let's say, narratives about immigration do as well, right? So in a way, she indulges with that, indulges in that idea that immigrants are just these other people, right? These faceless people. And yet she has to reckon with, well, that's also what they think of me. That's also what I've become in this moment. So, yeah, it does a lot of that, like thinking about the broader narratives that Nazish finds herself within, even though she's not necessarily conscious of them, at least not on a macro level, but she's aware of like her position in relation to other people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think with a different narrative voice that would read differently, right? With a more detached, omniscient narrator could easily say like Nazish had thought herself XYZ, but this is actually the reality of what was going on for people. But instead, because we're confined to that free and direct, where it's not entirely attributed to her, we're kind of caught in her mind frame as well, which I think is what is interesting about these other chapters, right? These side chapters where we are having to like live in her perspective, if not her mind, through the narration, right? Like we're not looking through her eyes, but we are in her way of thinking, her language. Like she thinks differently to the other characters that we read.
Yeah, completely, completely. She has a very singular way of viewing things. And so having access to that, I think Jamila feels privileged to have access to Nazish's way of viewing the world. And I think that for us, it's also a privilege because she is so unique in the way that she views the world and the way in which she's able to understand people and phenomena, right, with such huge confidence and such a lack of self-doubt. So having access to that, having someone who is able to distinguish between the different people in that space, right? Because they could all just be people who are wailing, bartering with gods, whatever. But she's separate from that. She's able to look at them with a sense of separateness to them, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and then within that second paragraph, you kind of continue this listing idea a bit with like the detention center had a dining room, day room, gym, library, and laundry. The bedrooms were freshly painted, brightly lit, decorated. Like the listing of the people then kind of merges into the listing of the stuff, right, in the center. In that, like the attention to brightly lit, freshly painted kind of links to that listing of the women and the way they're treated, right? Like all kind of just like reduced to objects in a way. They're just descriptive things, right? They're nothing special. And then you change the kind of grammar, like an idea of airiness, but ultimately synthetic. You do a few of these non fully grammatical sentences, right? Like these fragment sentences, not there was an idea of airiness, but an idea of airiness, but ultimately synthetic. So you get kind of like oh, maybe we're going to get the air again, but actually it's curtailed instantly. That comma is like, no, no, you're not having.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I like that. Maybe I didn't realize I was doing that. But I guess it's a way in which maybe I think and I write that is about cutting ideas down quite quickly, right? There's like an impatience with the idea and a desire to just sort of dispense with it immediately. So I think that like listing the things, listing the objects, right? It's also about dismissing that idea straight off. This idea that having nice curtains, having access to a gym is automatically going to make this bearable, right? And so it was like, well, no, let's not even indulge in that thought because it's not real, right? So I think that that's what that's doing. And I guess in the beginning it does something similar, as you say. There's just this like, yeah, let's just make all of this stuff feel as jagged and as like unreal as possible. Let's not indulge some of these ideas too much. The ideas that people think that this is an innocuous space, a space that isn't a space in which the system wields power over people and has the ability to decide their movements and and also one that has like such a huge mental health impact on people. So that was also kind of the purpose of that thing, the tension between this is a space with loads of facilities and yet it messes with people's heads so badly. And Nazish is really like fundamentally changed by it, right? Which is why, like here at the end, she says that word of like daring, right? It's only when she leaves does she dare to hold the air in her lungs again. It's just the way that the system confinement can sort of decimate even your understanding of what you are entitled to, right? Am I entitled to even breathe? She only dares to do that when she leaves.
Yeah, it really reminds me of like Claudia Rankine's work, right? In the Don't Let Me Be Lonely and Citizen. Like the breath is often there in her the figures that populate those bits of text, where like what you take in and what you expunge can be toxic in both directions in so many ways. Like she in those books, she's really thinking about like American racism and the way it permeates the body, right? How it lives in the body. And I think that's what this paragraph does. If the first paragraph is a bit more of she's differentiating herself from others or trying to hear the body, all we have is that, right? All we have is her body. She's not describing how she feels. We're receiving the registering of what's happening to her on the body, whether it's like the indignities. She had plugged her period blood, eaten potatoes, they left her unable to use the bathroom, shivered in the cold. Right, again, like one, two, three, these like fragment sentences that are just reduce her to like her bodily functions that have been radically altered because of this space. I think there's real emphasis and power in the fact that those sentences are quite hard and like blunt in that way. They don't have even the niceness of grammar to introduce them, right? It's just eaten, shivered. Like you don't even get a nice framing.
Yeah, they're quite blunt and quite primal almost, right? Because the detention center reduces you to that. It reduces you to kind of like just your elemental human traits, the things that you have to do to survive. And I think in those moments also, it was like an opportunity to take it to the place where ordinarily we wouldn't look, right? And ordinarily, I personally wouldn't write in that particular space. So I wouldn't really talk about people's bodily functions, right? I wouldn't write about periods. I wouldn't write about the ability to go to the bathroom. But these are like the very elemental ways in which the system robs you of your dignity, right? And I sort of wanted that paragraph and this section in particular to be something that readers cannot look away from. So, the rest of the story and in other parts of the book, there are these, like there are beautiful descriptions and there's humor and there's all of these other things. And maybe we talk about the system in a much more abstract way. But in this section, there is no turning away from the sort of like cumulative impact of something like the detention system on a person. And I think it forces us to confront how we would feel eating just potatoes and chicken nuggets, using tissue paper to plug our periods, and so on and so on. Sharing a room with somebody who's screaming out at night, but that's threatening to kill you. These are things that we cannot necessarily imagine, but it's something that we have to force ourselves to contend with, and contend with not just one. I think that I'm always interested in like not the singular, right? The plurality and the compounding of different experiences all together. So I think that that's what this section does as well. It's about the cumulative effect of all of this.
Right. And there's a sense that if we were just in her mind, like I felt X or she felt X or was thinking about this, there's a certain kind of explanatory power to that, whereas actually being rooted firmly in her body means that we have to like feel the brunt of that ourselves too as readers. And I thought that was really strong as a kind of technical choice. We're not having a long paragraph of this is how she felt. That's too easy almost. It's more you have to bear some of what she's going through and you can't look away from that.
Yeah, we feel because maybe she can't or maybe she won't, right? And given the story, and you know it, so much of it is about what she's willing to give us and what she refuses to. So I think that, again, I would say unconsciously, even this moment is about her choosing not to give us the breakdown of that moment, right? The impact that it has had on her in terms of feelings. What she can do is she can report it, right? That these things happened, but not the impact, not the feeling, not what stays with her. It's just, and I think that's kind of what makes it. We have to do the feeling because she can't, right? Or she won't. She won't give us that. Yeah.
That's strong. And then we get another repetition, and not until she sat on the train that returned her to Manchester back in August. Not until that rhetorical device, right? I can't help but hear the lawyer in some of that rhetoric, right? The kind of forms of language of not persuasion, but really trying to get a reader on one side or trying to kind of pull someone in. The repetitions really feel like you have to pay attention to this. Not until she sat on that train, not until she made an appointment, had she dared to hold air in her lungs again. That final bit then is your payoff for the repetition somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't repetition such a great rhetorical device, right? I love it in writing, and I don't use it a lot, but I think there are moments when it really has a lot of payoff, because again it forces us, as you say, to pay attention to something. And I think sometimes just the hammering home of particular words or particular images, they help us to really sit with the gravity of what is happening. And so that repetition of air and airiness and what is real and what is synthetic in all its forms, the idea of breathing in all its forms. And then it's repeated outside of that section, right? That when Nazish then is asked about her time in detention, the first thing that she does is she stops breathing, right? And then she has to remind herself to breathe. And she sort of counts, or she takes a deep breath and sips some water and so on. So there is that like, yeah, the air is also the sort of lingering impact of it. Yeah, and the repetition is forcing us to pay attention. And I really enjoy that. And I think that you picked a really good bit, I would say, because I was wondering what you were going to choose, but it's a bit that I'm quite proud of. So yeah, Because it's easy with a section like this, like it's easy just to take everything that you know about a system and sort of just say it or weave it through her perspective. But I think, again, as a nonfiction writer and as a lawyer, there is like access to a particular kind of language that can be used in a fictional setting to to force us to reckon with it in a way that we wouldn't ordinarily in a short story.
Yeah. And I think the novel does that quite explicitly, right? Like we don't have scenes like in courtrooms or in litigation rooms or in any kind of like we're always in the office or in people's home spaces or outside. We're kind of almost refused entry into the kind of the machinations of the legal system. In a sense, we're always kind of hearing secondhand what people did in a room or like how this went or how someone responded. And I really like that choice to be, it could easily be a very simplistic courtroomy dramery kind of thing, right? But instead we get all of the other spaces in which discourse happens.
Yeah, completely. Because, honestly, I thought the idea of writing like a courtroom drama or a single asylum seeker refugee drama in a sort of Hollywood-esque style really boring, and really like yeah, just not. It didn't excite me at all, and also it wasn't true to the kind of politics that I was trying to express in this book, which are also not just about the politics of like immigrants and immigration, but about like broader questions of solidarity and what it means to be an individual in a community, or yeah, whose stories we are made up of, and I think that again somebody has told me this and I agree with it, that so much of the book is about redirection, that so many of the characters don't give us the stories, the scenes that we want. We have this assumption that the story is here, it's in A, but they're like, no, 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 come with me over here. The story's actually over there, the story that I want to tell you. And I think that Nazish is the perfect example of someone who has like complete grasp of her story in a way that she then is able to choose what you're going to know, what she's willing to tell you, and what the story is, right? It's not the story we think it is. The story is something else, right? Like in this story, in Nazish's bit, it's all about the tussle of like, well, what does it mean to tell a story? What is the story? What is the idea of the truth? All of that sort of stuff is what she's like asking questions of. So the idea of like that a character is going to share their trauma with you, you know, and all of that stuff that we see in fiction, the trauma plot, she's very much saying, I am not going to give you the trauma plot. You are not going to have access to that. And then there are moments where that there's a fissure, right? That she sort of breaks a little bit and she gives us a glimpse of it. And this is one of them, I think.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm going to ask you some general questions to kind of end. You've already told us a little bit about your early writing experiences and Power Rangers. Where are you writing now? Do you have a process, a practice, a day and time? Do you have rituals? Do you have snacks? Are you in the same time? Do you do it on a computer? What's your setup?
I'm really unprecious about writing and the writing process. So I wouldn't say that I have a writing process or a writing ritual or anything like that. Like I have a study, which is where I'm recording from, and I do spend some time writing here. But I think just because of my personality, I need to be in different spaces and I need to be stimulated by the space that I'm in. So depending on how I feel that particular day or what stage I'm at in writing, the writing has to happen somewhere that's not the study. So it might be that I have to write in a cafe or I have to write in a bookshop or on a train or just at, a lot of the first two books were written at work, just in an hour between clients or something, I would take something apart and put it back together again. And yeah, I feel like those rituals and processes and things are just kind of like they're made too much of, right? And you just have to get on with it. So I just get on with it. But also I think that I have like a good ability to like I could be hyper focused. So it's just easy for me to like get into a space and just tune everything out. But I would say like, yeah, I need to eat. Eating is good distraction. I need to drink something. Drinking is a good distraction. I think in the writing process, I need to be able to talk about stuff with people. So yeah, I like being able to do that with my partner or my friends who are writers. I need to constantly think about the way that something is working. And so often like the writing is not actual like getting words down. It's maybe writing around the thing or thinking around the thing. And I write everything by hand first, often several times before I type it up, just because I think I need to have a sense of a connection to what I'm writing that is not achievable by putting it directly on a computer, right? Because there's something that doesn't make you edit in the same way that you edit when you're writing something by hand, right? So I tend to write stuff by hand a lot. And actually, I think the interesting thing about it is that it's not even a case of just like writing the thing out and then putting it down. Often it's like paragraph by paragraph and trying to get I'm working on something new at the moment. And so the last 2 days I've been working on like the right opening and just trying to get the opening paragraph right, because I think that once that works, then the rest will follow. But I would also say that I don't have a writing process in the sense that there is no one way, right? I've not written a book in a single way. I've not written a short story in a single way. Every time I do it, it's different. And I'm also open to trying things out differently because I'm not wedded to anything. You know, I've only written 2 books, so if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I know that I'll hopefully get there in the end. But I think that it's important to give yourself like introduce novelty into the process because it creates the opportunity for something else to arise, something that you might not have contemplated before.
No, but also that's what Don DeLillo does, right? He does 1 paragraph per page, and he will like make a new page for the new paragraph, and he will get it until that paragraph is crisp and clean and where he wants it, which I love. The last question is like, do you have any books you want to recommend to listeners? Anything you're currently reading, or an old book, or something that's going to come out?
Yeah. Well, I'm reading 2 books at the moment. I'm reading A Thread of Violence by Mark O'Connell, which is a superlative piece of nonfiction. It's really brilliantly written. It's really beautifully written, actually. And I think that it constantly asks questions about the act of writing about a murderer as well, and about people who have been victims of somebody else's violence and the ethics of that. So I think that that's really, really interesting. And then I think like the book that I'm really obsessed with, and we've spoken about this, is Small Rain by Garth Greenwell. I think it's really beautifully written. I think it's probably the best thing that he's written. And just like the attention to the sentence, but also the attention to like the small moments in a person's life, the small ideas, the as well as the big ideas, the moments that we're living in, and just the way that he's able to spend so much time with those things, that I find really inspiring. So I'm just reading and thinking like, this is just incredible. Yeah, that's just like up there for me. He's so brilliant.
Yeah, that book killed me. Yeah, it's one of those ones where I'm reading it. I'm like, I don't know how you make sentences like this. Maybe I'll get to talk to Garth at some point. If anyone listening knows him, please send him my way. I would love to talk to him about sentences. Well, thank you so much, Tawseef, for joining us. It was a thrill and a pleasure, and everyone should go out and buy the book immediately.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Please subscribe if you haven't already, leave a review, and share with people you know. You can also follow the show and me on Instagram at Books Up Close and on YouTube. And if you can, please do fill out the feedback form linked in the show notes. It's really helpful to us. You can get show transcripts and more information by subscribing to the Substack. This show is made possible by an Impact Accelerator Award from the University of Hertfordshire and the Arts and Humanities Research Council.